Cardinal Sarah makes his voice heard again, and his words leave no one indifferent. He speaks with respect and firmness about Pope Leo XIV, pointing the way many prefer to avoid, a voice that must be listened to in its entirety. Stay with us. The interview given by Cardinal Robert Sarah to the daily newspaper Avenir is destined to spark discussion. At 80 years old, the Guinean Cardinal, former prefect of the Congregation for Divine Worship, presents himself as a witness who is not afraid to raise his voice in a time of confusion. The conversation, which took place on September 12th, touched on the central issues of today's ecclesial and cultural life without making concessions to accommodating rhetoric. Sarah spoke with the language of someone who has lived decades of faith amid persecution, crisis, and epochal changes, and she did so with the inner freedom that characterizes great African pastors. The interview is therefore much more than a simple exchange of opinions. It is a sign that in the heart of the Church there survives a voice capable of forcefully recalling what does not pass, even amid the turmoil of a world that claims to redefine everything, even God himself. Cardinal Sarah expressed a surprisingly clear and positive assessment of the reigning pontiff, who has chosen the name Leo XIV. In his view, the Pope is restoring to the Church what is essential and indispensable: the centrality of Christ. In an age in which attention often seems to shift towards social, political, or ideological dynamics, the Cardinal sees in Leo XIV a pastor who never forgets the heart of the gospel. Sarah noted how the pontiff knows how to look at the world with intelligence, listening and engaging in dialogue without renouncing that profound bond with tradition that has always been the foundation of Catholicism. According to him, this is a rare and necessary balance, which avoids both the temptation of a rootless progressivism and that of a rigid and sterile conservatism. From this perspective, the Cardinal's judgment takes on the value of a compass. What is needed is not to chase the world or retreat into an embalmed past, but to return decisively to Christ, the sole vital center of the Church. Cardinal Sarah highlighted how two opposing and equally dangerous visions are emerging in today's Church. On the one hand, there are those who, in the name of openness to the world, tend to erase tradition, reducing the deposit of faith to a malleable material to be adapted to the cultural trends of the moment. On the other hand, however, there is the opposite temptation to consider tradition as a museum relic, crystallized and removed from any fruitful historical dynamism. Both paths, according to Sarah, lead to a dead end, because a church that denies its roots loses its identity, while a church that immobilizes them renders them incapable of generating life. The challenge, therefore, lies in recovering tradition as a living reality, rooted in the faith of the centuries, but capable of illuminating the present. It is at this point that the interview shows all its strength. It is not enough to choose between conservation and revolution. We must recognize that tradition is both memory and source, a legacy that is not preserved with fear, but with the courage to bear witness to it. When speaking about the contemporary West, Cardinal Sarah didn't mince his words. In his view, the idea that we can live without God has become established, as if man could occupy a place that doesn't belong to him. It is the image of a humanity that has dethroned the Creator to sit on the throne in his place, deluding itself that it is sufficient unto itself. In this scenario, the new idols are not stone statues, but products of a spiritual void disguised as progress. Success, wealth, power, dominion over things, and even people. The West, both satiated and desperate, has surrendered to a cult of the ephemeral that leaves no room for transcendence. Sarah's words resonate as a stern warning. When God is set aside, all that remains is the worship of what is by nature fragile and fleeting. And from this illusion arise unstable societies and lost hearts. For Cardinal Sarah, God is never a simple idea or a vague feeling that each person can shape as they please. It is not the result of an emotional conviction or abstract reasoning, but a certainty that sustains the believer's life. In a world that relativizes everything and reduces faith to one opinion among many, the Cardinal forcefully recalls the objective nature of God. He is real, present, and trustworthy. This statement appears disruptive precisely because it contrasts with the dominant attitude, where religion is confined to the private and subjective sphere, as if it were a psychological accessory. Sarah overturns this logic and affirms that faith is not born from individual whim, but from the encounter with a God who reveals himself and who remains the solid foundation on which to build life. In this sense, his voice takes on the tone of a counterculture, a call to rediscover the certainty of God as the only authentic answer to the disorientation of our time. Sarah then recalled that the Church does not belong to any man, but only to the risen Christ. He is the true Lord, while the Pope, although visible head of the Catholic community, remains only a humble servant at the service of the gospel. This perspective scales down any temptation to attribute to the pontiff the role of absolute master of the Church, as if he could dispose of it at his own pleasure. The Cardinal's words thus take on a countercurrent value because they forcefully recall the distinction between authority and possession. The Pope exercises a received ministry, not an invented power. This is a point that highlights the very logic of the Catholic faith, founded on continuity with Christ and not on human management of the Church. In times when the papacy is often interpreted through political or media categories, Sarah reminds us that true authority does not arise from autonomy, but from fidelity to the risen one. Cardinal Sarah, speaking of synodality, said, "It is only a means and not an end," recalling that communion remains hierarchical, as Christ intended. He noted that Leo XIV defined it as more of a style than a structure. Regarding the liturgy, he noted that the variety of rites has never undermined the unity of the faith, and asked whether it is really possible to prohibit a centuries-old rite. In the document Fiducia Supplicans, he defined it as theologically weak, unjustified, and dangerous to the unity of the Church, hoping it would be clarified or forgotten. Ultimately, he described himself as a witness, a call to the global north, satiated yet desperate. If you liked the video, comment, Amen. God bless you.